Our nation is in trouble. I'm talking about our government and our culture. And the only one answer to what we are facing is Jesus. Jesus said in John chapter 12, verse 32, "And when I am lifted up, I will draw all men unto me." We need to lift up Jesus in our nation and across the world. So we will be considering the politics and cultural issues of our day in light of God's Word. So today, let's consider this. ICE deportations. Hi, everybody. I'm Keith Allen, and this is Consider This. Welcome to this week's show. Today, we're going to be talking about a very sensitive topic, the ICE deportations of illegal immigrants down here in South Texas. Several days ago, I was contacted by a local news organization asking if I would do an interview to discuss the ICE deportations of illegal immigrants. And certainly I have a point of view, being right now we're up 92% in deportations versus prior to Trump taking office. And so this reporter wanted to know if I'd be willing to talk about, what's my point of view? What do I see as some of the potential impacts? What do I think we should do? What's my opinion, etc.? And so obviously I was glad to take the interview, and so we did that. This was a few days ago. And I'll just say at the front end of this subject, at the front end of this program, this is a very sensitive topic. It's easy for any of us to jump on one side with a real hard line. But I think, and anybody that knows me will tell you this, I think we have to be very rock solid on our Constitution, on the laws of our nation. I won't vary from that. At the same time, we also have to understand God's law, which is a law of love. So I'm going to give you two familiar passages of Scripture, and I'm going to give them to you in an order. I'm going to read out of chapter 13 first, and then I'm going to read out of chapter 12, and you'll see why I'm doing it in that order in just a moment before we really jump into the subject. So, number one, let's take a look at Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 4, and I'm in the NIV version. "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves." Verse 3, "For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong." In other words, if you're not breaking the law, you don't have to worry about it. "Do you want to be free from fear of one in authority? Then do what is right." In other words, stay within the law, and you'll be commended. Verse 4, "For the one in authority is God's servant." So government is God's servant. "The one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong," in other words, if you break the law, "be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer." In other words, they're supposed to punish those who break the law. So keep that in mind. So obviously, the view that people will have there, and I think rightfully so, is, hey, if the law is you break our law and you come into our country illegally, hey, you're subject to deportation. Problem I have is I hear people even on the side that believe that, they have that view without taking God's love into consideration. So as we think about this subject, understand we're still talking about people. And when you go to Romans chapter 12 and you read verses 9 through 13, I'd say, yes, let's make sure we're following the law. At the same time, let's make sure we're understanding the law of God inside of that. Verse 9, "Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor. In other words, let's make sure we're not losing the love of God and how we think about and treat people because of the laws. Serving the Lord. Verse 12, be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. And here's what I want us all to pay attention to. The last two words. Practice hospitality. And that word hospitality is actually translated kindness. Practice kindness. Doesn't mean we don't uphold our laws, but there's ways to do things. And as Christians, as Republicans, as humans, we should never miss kindness. And I just want us to keep that in mind as we go through today's program. And I hope it's going to be short today. I did the interview, and I'm just going to review with you what I said, if you will, during this interview. So first of all, that was a big focus. Hey, deportations are up 92% since President Trump took office. Yes, they are. But I said, let's just back up a minute because you've got to take it in context. So from 2020 to 2024, the Biden presidency years, over 11 million illegal border crossings, and that's just what we know of. That is a lot. And when you take that in comparison to the prior 4 years with President Trump, there were 3 million for the entire 4 years. That is a huge difference. So is there going to be more deportations? Well, of course, you open the borders. This is where I want us to keep this Romans 12. Let's make sure we're staying, we have a mindset that's spiritual and we're still rooted in kindness. But here's what I would tell you. When you think about what Trump ran on the first time he ran for president, what did he say? Build a wall, close the border. That's by and large the reason he was voted in. When you fast forward and you say he was just elected in 2024, why? Well, one of his big messages was, these borders have been open, we've had a southern invasion, and we will deport them all. By and large, America voted him in because of that message. But I want you to understand this, and I said this to the newscaster. Deporting illegal immigrants is nothing new. This isn't something that, President Trump is doing it, nobody else did it. Many of you remember when President Barack Obama was in office, he was nicknamed the Deporter-in-Chief because he deported so many people. And even Bill Clinton, and I think in this number, they were also including the ones that were turned away at the border, but they said he deported upwards of 12 million people. So this isn't a Donald Trump thing. Our Constitution says we have laws for how you get into this nation and become citizens. And if you violate that, we send you out of our country. And then when you want to see how it got complicated even more, and I've talked about this over the last several weeks because it's a subject it's dear to my heart, and it's actually bugging me, to tell you the truth, as the more I dig into it, is in 2012, President Obama instituted this DACA thing, this Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which was for illegal immigrants. They'd bring their children over. They could have been anywhere from babies to 16 years old. They brought them over. Well, DACA, as it's known, DACA was not a legal status term. All that did was protect these children from deportation, and every 2 years they have to reapply. So then that goes into this muddled immigration system that we already have, right? So when I'm talking to this reporter, I'm saying, well, heck yeah, this thing is a mess. But here's what's happened over the last couple of years, and I'll say, not just the last 4 years, but the last 4 years, it got crazy. There were businesses, especially when you consider construction, hospitality,
agriculture. There are many businesses that got used to having these workers. Now you can say, well, they shouldn't have. You can say anything you want about that. You can't undo, you can't go back in time. This happened. So you do have to deal with that problem. So how you're going to deal with it, I don't have all the answers. Obviously, I have some ideas, and I like what I'm starting to hear from President Trump. And I just pulled some of his speaking points, just things he said recently. He's indicating that he's had a little bit of a potential shift in his policy for undocumented workers. And he talks about 3 specific industries. The ones that I talked about are sectors. And he says, we might have to come up with a way where we have temporary passes so that gives them legal status, but doesn't make them American citizens. And then there's 3 or 4 ways he's talking about getting business owners involved and that kind of thing. And I think that's all smart. I think you got to get a lot of smart people in a room and figure this thing out. At the same time, it's not fair when you look at somebody that's been trying to do it right. They've been in line for 3-4 years. I am not for saying, hey, these people that came in illegally, we're just going to give them amnesty. And these poor people that have been trying to do it the right way, they're just going to have to continue. That doesn't make any sense. So I think it's a complex issue. And I think there are some things you could do right now. And it looks like President Trump is trying to do those things. But when you just ask me on the surface, she asked me, what's your opinion? I said, well, here's my opinion. If you walk into any country, not just the United States, you can put any country's name there you want. If you have illegal immigrants that cross your border, they didn't go through ports of entry, they went through some other way, whether it's through the river, through the woods, through the cartel, however, you get people that enter any country illegally, they need to go. Now, do I feel that way about DACA? No, because these are kids that came, this was not them breaking the law. They were actually given this DACA status, and they were not given a way to attain citizenship. So I think that's something we can figure out, and we could actually figure it out pretty easily. But these businesses that got used to these workers, we need construction and companies shutting down because of workers, agriculture. So there's ways we can do this with temporary work passes, expanding the visa programs. There's things we can do and should do, and I believe we're going to do. But we have to understand why this whole thing even comes to a head. The whole reason we're in this situation right now is because President Biden allowed an illegal invasion at our southern border for the last 4 years. And I had a friend of mine, good friend of mine, tell me the other day, well, Biden kind of invited them in. So is it really their fault? Yes, it is their fault. And here's what I'm going to tell you. In the last 4 years, people were flooding over because they knew they had Biden. Here's how you know that they knew they were breaking our laws, because they didn't come through the port of entries. What they did is they either juked our system, our asylum system. I say they juked it because 90% of them don't qualify. So they either came through that way, or they went through illegally, whether it was through the river, through the cartel, however they got here. They knew they were doing wrong. So do they belong here? They absolutely don't belong here, and they need to be deported. But if you said, but Keith, how do you do that? Do I think we need to prioritize? We absolutely have to prioritize. I mean, if you have people here, not only did they cross our borders illegally, but now they've also committed crimes. Okay, that's first on the list. Yes, they need to go. But, near the end of this interview, when I was talking to this reporter, I said, here's some of the things I would tell you we need to do, like right now. Number one, I don't want to get past this. Number one, we can get this DACA thing. It needs to stand on its own. We can get that figured out right now. That should be That should be something the Democrats and the Republicans, both sides, can come together on that pretty easily. If you just take a compassionate tone and a logical tone, you're not going to take somebody that's been here. They came here when they were 5 years old. They've been here 15, 20 years. They have businesses. They have kids, whatever. And you're going to say, we're going to send them home. Well, like it or not, anybody's watching this, I'm just going to tell you, they are home. And we do have to figure out what that looks like. So instead of every 2 years where they're having to reapply for DACA status, you just say that doesn't go anymore. The next time you go to apply, you're applying for citizenship, and then you have a process. I don't know what the process is. Is it a 5-year process? Is it a 3-year process? I think we can figure that out. But to say we're going to send somebody back to El Salvador or Mexico or whatever, and their entire life has been here since they were babies, that doesn't make any sense. If they got a criminal record, that's a different story. We could figure that out. So that's number one. I don't even think that should be part of this reform. I think that should stand on its own and it should just be done. But when you talk about immigration reform, what could happen right now? The biggest, most important thing that had to happen immediately is we had to shut down the border. President Trump did that. It's interesting how for 4 years we heard President Biden and Kamala Harris talk about how it couldn't be done and it needed to go through Congress and you need to do this and both sides have to. It was a bunch of baloney. Trump walked in. We have lower border crossings now than we've ever had in the history of our country. So that was number one that had to be done. Okay, we've shut that down. Now, yes, now you go into deportation, but I do think it has to be prioritized. And maybe there's been a little bit of overzealousness lately, and it looks like Trump is trying to massage that right now. I agree with that. I think we need a very specific plan for permanent workers, temporary workers. I think we've got to reform the entire asylum processing plan. And then I think whether anybody likes it or not, if you crossed illegally, you have committed a crime against the United States. And I think we have to be very, very clear about that. But if you say, what about the person that, came here as a child with DACA? That's a different story. And then you take these last 4 years where people just flooded. I think you take those folks, and I like what they're doing with the self-deportation, but it's not happening enough. The only thing I'd like to see a little bit different, and I think I'm starting to see it, is I'd like to have them live out the way they said they would prioritize it. And I think we are getting there. So overall, this is a really touchy subject. And I think the biggest thing I wanted people to hear from me on this subject is, one, I am a staunch constitutionalist. So I believe in the Constitution in its original intent and writing. So if you crossed the border and you did that knowingly, illegally crossed and came into our country, yes, you should be deported. Unless there's real extenuating circumstances, and I think there's times when you do have to look at those on a one-on-one basis. DACA, again, that should be taken care of because there was no law that these children broke. And I think you got to get that fixed. I said this to the news reporter, and I'll say it here. When I get to Congress, I can tell you I will be involved in those conversations. This is something I'm pretty passionate about. I love our country, but I also have a heart for people. And I think we can do this. We can do this in a way that's good for our country, honors our Constitution, and at the same time, we have to put something in place long-term that truly simplifies and reforms our entire immigration system. It's just interesting. The last point I'll make, as I talked to her, she asked me several questions about DACA. And I don't know how much, you talk for 20 minutes to a reporter and I don't know what'll air. But I can tell you what I told her. And that is, we have a lot of people that are currently in Congress down here in South Texas. And it does bother me that nobody is talking about DACA. So the guy that I'm going to run against in 2026, Vicente Gonzalez, you're not hearing him talk. He's not saying anything about DACA. And when I talk to even some of my Republican friends, when I talk to them about it, they're like, hey, you want to stay away from that subject? No, I don't want to stay away from that subject. I want to do what's right. And I think most people, when you look at it logically, I think most people are going to agree with me. And when you have people saying, well, they should have, when they turned 18, they should have applied for citizenship and they didn't, so now they got to go. It's actually not true. You can't just say, well, I have DACA status, so based on that, I'm going to apply for citizenship. That doesn't work because DACA does not give them legal status to be here. And then there is no simple way. They can get married and there's things like that that you can do. Actually, there's ways around the system, but there's not a real way to do it right and to do it efficiently and effectively. And I think we can fix that right away. So anyway, this was a pretty short program. And this next week, just so you all know, I'm actually headed to Germany. Actually, this week. I'm headed to Germany this week. I won't be back until the 21st. We'll still have a show. I'll send Charlie some things, and maybe it'll just be some clips, over the last 30 days or so. Many of you saw our official launch event on June 21st. We have an event similar to that that's going to happen on the 2nd of August in Kingsville, Texas. So until next week, God bless you, and we will talk to you all then.